Hey, everybody, and welcome back to the Empathic Leader, where we talk all things emotional intelligence, empathy, and leadership. I am Dr. Melissa, and I'm so happy to have you along for the ride. Please remember to like, subscribe, and comment so we can keep this conversation going. Today is part 3 of a 3-part series where we go into a deep dive of my new book, The Empathic Leader, talking about why the book happened, how I think it can help leadership, and what we should really do moving forward. So let's get into it.
From this quote from Brené Brown, she says, the most dangerous red flag a leader can show is the inability to face their own vulnerabilities. And in this chapter, in chapter 10, you talk about the idea of there being different flags of evaluating kind of the spectrum of empathy that a leader might have. Yeah. Can you walk us through this concept of beige flags, red flags, and just ways of taking inventory, so to speak, of yourself as a leader or other people in your organization? Why would you want to go through this process of taking inventory in the first place? What are you looking for? And what are your thoughts on this process?
So the whole reason I wrote this chapter is these are the patterns that I kept seeing when I was consulting with my husband, later when I was doing my own stuff. You know, these are the things that come up again and again and again that people aren't aware of. They don't even realize they're doing it half the time. So that's why I wanted to say, look, this is what it is. Because I think it's a dating thing, you know, where if you're dating someone and it's a beige flag, it's something that's like, yeah, they leave the cap off the toothpaste, but I can live with this, you know, as opposed to a red flag, which is like, I'm not living with that. I am out. And it's the same kind of thing, you know, it's still a relationship. So if you're in an employment relationship and you're like, yeah, I don't love the way they run meetings, but I can live with it, you know, because they mean well and they can maybe learn, as opposed to a red flag where it's like, there's no way, because this is not going to get better and I'm going to get squashed. So it kind of goes back to with the job, with the professorship, there were a bunch of red flags in the beginning that I ignored, and because I wanted it too bad. And if I hadn't ignored them, I don't know what trajectory my life would have taken, but it would have been very different. So, you know, these are the patterns that I kept seeing over and over again. Like, one for me is the way people use their verbiage, right? Mm-hmm. If you've got someone and they tend to, you know, if you talk and you tell them something they don't want to hear, they start talking over you, but yet they can stop later and say, you know, I'm sorry, I really shouldn't have done that. That was actually kind of rude. Let's take a step back and let me hear what you have to say. Or like you were saying earlier, maybe there's an outburst, but later they can say, look, I'm sorry. This was pushing my buttons. This was not the right way to respond. Let's try this again. You know, that's a beige flag. Okay, yeah, that tells me they're not a great communicator, but they're aware of it and they're trying. And that's cool. As opposed to someone who is a yeller and screamer and will beat you down with words so that they don't have to hear your ideas, or so that they can be the loudest roar in the jungle, or just because they're just always right and they don't want to hear anything else. You know, those are red flags, because those people aren't open to hearing anything different and they don't understand the problem. So unless something drastic happens, that behavior isn't going to change. So, you know.
Absolutely. And that can be difficult to see, because I can imagine people are going to go through this chapter and they're going to take inventory of some of these flags, and there's going to be clarity of the people that they're working with. And maybe even for themselves, you know, wow, I really could have taken more accountability in that moment. But with that kind of clarity comes a lot of tough decisions that you have to make, because it's one thing to ignore a red flag and it's another to not know that it was red. And there's a lot of education that, you know, and that comes into helping you identify what is which. And sometimes it takes difficult experiences, as we discussed, to have that education. What would you say to somebody that goes through this chapter and sees multiple red flags, and maybe for the first time?
Well, I think that's probably actually easy to do, because the other thing that those of us with empathy tend to do is we put the blame and judgment back on ourselves. Mm-hmm. What did I do wrong? How did I mess this up? I need to be able to connect and understand to this situation. Why didn't I do X, Y, or Z? So I think it can be very easy to let multiple red flags slide by because you're busy being introspective when in that moment you're needing to assess what's going on the outside.
Mm-hmm.
And for someone, if they see these and they're multiple ones, I mean, take the time to really reflect on them. You know, is this someone that you think actually wants to do well, that can be talked to, that is able to see a different point of view? You know, and do you want to go through the trying to make this happen? Or is this someone that it's just not going to happen? I mean, unfortunately, the best thing you can do, again, if you can, is get out. And if you can't get out, then you need to set up those boundaries to be able to survive until you can find a different way or a different position or some other way to survive without it, you know, beating you up too bad. Because that's the realities of life. You know, and I've seen managers and supervisors too that have had employees like that are just they fly off the handle. They're difficult to manage. They it's their way or no way. There's always an excuse, that kind of thing. And you know, same thing. You're getting red flags from this employee. Well, as a manager, you know, there are certain steps you can take to have within, you know, the realm of decency. You know, if this employee just doesn't fit, then these are the things you need to do to create the best work environment for everybody else, you know, because that's part of it as well, is understanding what's going on with this group. But as an employee, you don't have that luxury, you know, of being able to do that. So, you know, understanding what you're seeing, critical, not caring, not judging yourself, and not judging the other person either. Just, this is the information, this is the data. Yeah, I can live with this and it'll be okay. Or yeah, it's time for me to pack up my desk.
Yeah. That sounds like an incredibly hard set of decisions to make with so many factors involved, especially if you have people dependent on you for income or, you know, insurance in the States specifically. One thing is a single person without dependence to almost like the existing power structures that exist in unempathic organizations or organizations that struggle to employ actionable empathy are even more powerful when, like we've talked about, the benefits are a big part of why the job was sought out. This is actually an interesting distinction. One of the places that I worked for and had, you know, not so great experiences at called themselves a family, right? And that was one of the things that I was appealed to me as a young recent college graduate, right? It's like, oh, cool. This is like a new way of doing things. And I have a pretty small family. So like, I wasn't literally looking for a family, but I was like looking for a more modern way of, I don't know what all the psychology was. Can you speak to that? Because that knowing what I know now, that's a big red flag in hindsight.
Yes. And it's actually, I mean, I'm sure you already know this. I'm sure my audience does too, but that it's actually become a joke, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, we're like a family. Oh, like the Manson family? Yeah. You know? I mean, whose family? So it's kind of reached that point. And unfortunately, some organizations haven't figured this out yet, that when you tell people, oh, we're like family. Oh, yeah, because I moved out of my family for a reason. Are you sure this is what you want to do? So I don't know that in and of itself is a red flag, although it's definitely a flag of obliviousness within the current climate, which speaks to other things that, you know, if people are that oblivious to what's going on and what's happening in the current climate and within organizations and within the younger generations, that might speak more to the greater organization. And, you know, that's something to think about. But I think something that I do talk about in the book a lot is that words are fantastic, but actions are where it's at. So if someone tells you we're warm and we're cuddly and we're a family, but their actions say, and I'm going to cut you off at the ankles every chance I get, you know, you go into the interview and they're like, yeah, we're a family and we play volleyball together and we do all this other stuff because we all think we're great, but they're talking over the top of you, or they're constantly looking at their phone, or they don't actually ask you about you. They're busy telling you about all the great stuff there. You know, that's where here's those flags, and what you do with that is up to you. And you may decide to ignore it and it'll be fine, but you may decide to ignore them at your own peril.
Absolutely. And that's going back to what you were saying about the Manson family, there's a lot of workplaces embody patterns of dysfunctional family dynamics, right?
Yeah.
And so that joke is a joke on many levels, but also it's true, or it can be true, because in dysfunctional family patterns, your safety and your survival is kept because you play the role that the people in power want you to play, right? So you do what you need to get food on the table. You silence yourself in order to have security. That's like a reflex that happens there. And so I think one of the questions we can ask to continue to take inventory of the kind of place somebody wants to work in, right, is what is the level of equality that your input is given? How much of you are you, do you feel safe enough showing up as in the context of work? Can you add some to that list?
Well, I think part of that too is figuring out which things you care about, because there are some things that people would be willing to, this is a no deal, that other people are like, no, this is fine. I can handle this. It's not a big deal. And it's kind of like, in a family, ideally, not all families, but you are playing this role in return for shelter and food and whatever else. And sometimes it's a lot more and sometimes it's not a lot more. But, the idea is there is a give and take, hopefully. Same thing in an organization, hopefully. I mean, you're selling your time. So there are going to be certain expectations, and you're probably not going to like all of them. And unfortunately, that's part of the deal. There's give and take up to a degree. So you shouldn't ever be pushed beyond what you're willing to do, especially within the realm of at any price. There are things I think we've all had to do in jobs that we didn't want to do, but you did because you were getting paid to do it. It's modern work. It is what it is. But there are things that are not okay at any price. And there's a gray area in between those two things, and you have to decide where you lie on that gray area.
Absolutely. Great point. People want different things, and people are comfortable with different things, and they have different values for what they look for in a workplace. And something that might bother or be a red flag to somebody might be a beige flag to someone else, and it might not even be a flag at all, that's fascinating, just the different responses and preferences that people have. Stepping aside from this section for a little bit, I want to talk a little bit and get some insight from you on what it's like to do this work and see these changes happen in people and in organizations. I can imagine that it would be really fulfilling, given the experiences you had earlier in your career, to be contributing so significantly to the positive welfare of many people directly on the individual level that you get to see and work with, but then also knowing that other people are reaping the benefits of that.
Yes, because it really can be a win-win situation. It's not like you have to push some people down to create more profits, or you got to give up profits to have a happier customer base, or whatever it is. I mean, it really can create a win-win situation, and to be able to see, like, say, a group of people where the employee satisfaction scores were tanked, and then to understand, because I've been coaching this person, that those employee satisfaction scores ended up in the 90s in a matter of months. That's the other weird thing, is that people talk about how culture can take years to change. And I don't disagree with that, because if you really want to integrate a culture into where a place is, it takes time. But it's just like playing a football game where you get an early score and it can build that momentum. Same thing. If you can get in a department and change that culture so that people are happier, which makes them more productive, which means they're going to come to you with more innovative ideas and do more innovative things, which is going to affect that bottom line profit. Now, all of a sudden, you're on your way. And yeah, it might take years to completely do the whole thing, but that's a really good start,
And it's visible. It's like you write about that in the book, about there being a woman who was not necessarily, I think, known for empathy, or I can't remember the exact specifics at this moment, but people were stunned at the changes that were made in a short period of time, especially in larger organizations. I can see department turnarounds in a department at that scale. It's going to spread like wildfire because it's obvious that something's changed.
Right. Yes. And it's something that you can build on. I mean, unfortunately, that's the other thing. If you don't have the right support, it's really hard to build that momentum, because if you're trying to raise people up and they're always being squished down, well, that doesn't work as well. But if you actually have that support, and then you have more sponsor support, it's really amazing what a difference it can make. And I'm not going to pretend that suddenly it's going to be, Snow White and there's puppies and rainbows and butterflies. I mean, that's not how this works. Nor is it going to be something that absolutely everyone's going to buy into. They're not. But if you start to instill this kind of culture, in my experience, people that are really hesitant about this will self-select out. If something like empathy makes them that uncomfortable, then they'll figure out this isn't really the place for them. And you get this stuff like, oh, well, he's our highest earner. He's our best salesman. He's a terrible human being, but he brings in the most profits. But does he actually? I mean, he's driven out 3 assistants, and he's made it miserable on 2 of the customers. And every meeting he comes into, he's late and abrasive. Is he actually one of your top earners? Or would you be better off to get someone in there that is with your company culture and not against it?
I mean, that raises the question of, okay, there's the bottom line that might be being pointed to, but what's the real bottom line, that is beneath that one? That is how do people feel when they walk into a meeting? How do people feel when they enter the doors of the company? What's the reviews are they leaving on Glassdoor because they are satisfied with working there? Or, there's the bottom line, and there's the bottom line, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. I mean, I think we've all been in situations where we've seen people who are good people, who want to do well, who probably even came in as just like, I can't wait. And then they get in these horrible positions where they're stomped down, and you watch them just go. And like, I had a friend, and she was a good friend, and she was like the most honest, moral, just, super ethical person you could ever meet. And this job just beat her down and beat her down and beat her down until she felt like the only control that she had in her mind was she would, grab a packet of their Post-it notes here, grab some of their highlighters there, do stuff like that. And I mean, on a company scale, that's really not a big deal. But that would have gone against who she was up until the point that was the only way she felt she could have any control over her life. And in the process, there's no reason to be in a place that you're going to be pushed into becoming someone you're not to survive.
Totally. And that one of the things you mentioned in the book is that, like, emotions don't go away. They surface in other places. That kind of resentment that your friend might have been experiencing, there's certain levels of tolerance we all have to have especially in any interpersonal relationships, right? But especially in the workplace, certain levels of tolerance and resentment can build, and it doesn't necessarily get siloed away into, a quarantined container from the rest of your personality, right? Resentment, if it's something that's experienced repeatedly and in certain quantities, it's going to show up in other ways, and that's one of the things that makes us human, and also leads the question, when you notice that it's happening, do you want that to continue? Because
that spreads. That morale spreads. And now you're dealing with employee attrition. So there is a hard effect on the bottom line. Whether people want to admit it or not, we don't leave emotions at the door when we get to work.
That actually reminds me, there is this conception that people have of leadership as CEO, COO, CFO, top, brass in the executive suite, C-suite, whatever we want to call it, right? Yeah. But one of the things you mentioned in the book is that one of the most influential positions in terms of employing leadership and empathy is more middle management, what sometimes referred to as sandwich managers. Can you speak to, like, the influence and the necessity of empathy in that middle management domain?
Absolutely. Because that's one of those domains where it's like most important to make sure you're using cognitive empathy so that you're not burning yourself out, because you are a sandwich manager. You're beholden to the people below you and the people above you, which makes it really difficult because, you're like constantly, all the time. And if one or the other of these is dysfunctional, it can be really, really difficult. But that's also why they have the most power, even if they don't realize it, because you can influence down or influence up. And you really can. I think I mentioned in the book, I don't like the term manager. Manager goes back to, we're talking command and control style of leadership again, where, you think of the organization as a machine. And this is the theory behind it. The organization is a machine. People really are cogs and parts of the machine. So your job as a manager is to make sure this machine is running well and all the cogs are doing what they're supposed to do. And I just think we're beyond that. We're way beyond that. But there's still this idea that people need to be managed, and they don't. They need to be led. So I prefer middle leaders, number one, because they actually stand to do the most good, both up and down. But number two, because these are the people that will become C-suite executives. And they can either continue the tradition of putting people into upper level management positions that aren't there because they're the best leaders. They're there because they're the best technicians, bring in the most money, make the most sales. Or you can start sharpening your leadership skills early so that when you get to that spot, you can do better. You can do more. You can actually make the kind of difference that leadership should be able to do. Leadership should be able to handle strategy and vision. And if you can't bring others along with you because there's no connection and understanding, then no amount of command and control is going to fill that gap.
Agreed. I wish I had my staples like this, that was easy button. I wish I had my agreed button right there.
Yes, applause.
Right. There's such a reduction of the potential for ways of working together, but also just relating. It feels, going back to assembly line times. Yeah, it feels like we're working with robots if we're using that cogs in a wheel, which ironically more AI is coming on now than it did before, right? It does feel very outdated. And yet so many of these old ways of relating to workers are almost immutable. They live on and they're thought of as truth without seeing that this is actually a belief system that was encoded and popularized before it was just the way that things were.
Yeah. And that's just it. You think about it, and you have younger people that come up into upper leadership positions, and this is what they see modeled. This is what they see that people have been doing. And so they in turn do it, not because necessarily it's what they want to do, but because it's what they've seen, and they don't really think about doing it any other way. And we have generations of layers and layers and layers. So it's going to take someone who can actually look at it and go, there's a better way. And it isn't just about lip service. Like I said, we've been talking about emotional intelligence since 1991. It's not just about talking about it. It's not just about taking personality tests so we understand ourselves better. It's about actually digging in and doing it actionably, which brings me back to it's one thing to use it. It's another thing to do it.
Yeah, totally. And before we wrap up, there's that point that you make in the book that it's also never too late to start.
Yes.
Can you talk to that?
Absolutely. Because we go back again to adult learning, an awareness that there's a gap and a desire to fill it. And as long as you have the desire to fill it, you can start. You can start to ingrain the habits of self-reflection, the habits of self-awareness, the habits of self-empathy, so that you can then actually use empathy as a strategic skill. And you can do it starting today. Habits are a fuzzy thing. I mean, it depends on who you ask and how long it takes to build them or that kind of thing. But if you practice consistency, if you're consistently doing this and you're really trying to instill it, general rule of thumb is about 21 days if you're consistent with it. And that's not assuming that you have, maybe a certain amount of built-in talent, or that you've already considered how you want to be able to do this. You can start instilling this now. And you may or may not see results immediately, because the stuff that comes out of this are lagging indicators. They happen after whatever it is. But you can do it today and wait and see what results you get in 21 days. Commit to it for a month. Because really, what have you got to lose? Even if you learn a skill set that you can use at home and you can use with other people, and maybe you use within your sector of the organization, you've gained something.
Totally. This is a skill that we're talking about in the domain of the workplace, but it's so applicable elsewhere. It's a human skill. It allows you to connect in fundamental ways. I don't know if there can be a price put to that. It's certainly going to come up. Everybody has conflict in their life, right? And it comes up, but to start from the place of not needing to defend your turf at all costs, which seems like a popular defensive style. I've certainly had my own situations where I've done that, and hopefully I've improved a bit. But this is a life skill along with a business skill. It just happens to be extremely useful in almost everywhere. I also just want to congratulate you for a moment on writing this book, because I know it's been many years of navigating this process and writing it. And I really think this is one of the reasons I wanted to work with you so strongly on it, because it's such a important message, and there is so much goodwill that was spread by you completing this book for yourself, and also to allow other people to benefit from the work you've done. So it's been awesome to work with you on this, and I want to congratulate you on writing something that's really a great book that's going to help a lot of people, and business. It's going to help a lot of businesses as well.
Thank you. That means a lot to me, because that really is my focus. I mean, people say you shouldn't do stuff because you want to help people, but that's what I want to do. So, this is hopefully the first book of several. So
I could see that. And now this is a process you've been through. Now a lot of the things to expect. There's going to be other unknowns that come up, right?
Always.
But this is, I hope you keep writing.
Thank you. And just sincerely, thank you very much for your support. And to everybody in my audience, to anybody, I've had a lot of support from people who said, just keep going, don't give up. And, I appreciate that very much, because I could feel people and you giving empathy to me, and when I really needed it. And that's not a small thing. Hey, everybody. Thank you again for hanging in with this 3-part series on my new book, The Empathic Leader, available now on Amazon in paperback, hardback, Kindle, and with an audiobook version on its way out. Please remember to like, subscribe, and comment. Thank you so much to everybody for their support and love during all of this, because this is a message we need to get out. Thank you so much for being here with me, and let's go use some empathy.